Goeiemiddag julle, welkom. Ek hoop almal is gereed vir 'n lekker leersessie. My naam is Johan Kokemoer, ek is hoof van die Vereniging van Afrikaanse Wiskundeonderwysers en ons is deel van 'n groter span, die Skoleondersteuningsentrum, en ons wil vandag afskop, eintlik hierdie jaar afskop met 'n baie insiggewende sessie. Voordat ek vir Mike gaan gee, Mike het my toestemming gegee om nou eers 'n bietjie in Afrikaans te praat. So Mike, I'm just going to do a few minutes in Afrikaans, so please forgive me, bear with us. Hopefully you'll catch one or two of the words. So kom ons begin. Eerstens, baie welkom. Mag julle hierdie geleentheid saam met ons geniet. Dit gaan so 2 ure strek. Is 'n werkswinkel, is baie interaktief. Ek self het al van Mike se goeders gekyk, geleer en ons wil graag met hulle in samewerking tree in rakende 'n nagraadse diploma vir onderwysers. Baie van julle het reeds kontak gemaak met my by die wiskunde afdeling. So ons gaan kyk of ons dit kan laat werk. So ek en Mike gaan na die tyd daaroor ook vergader. Dan wil ek ook net vir julle sê, hoe gaan ons seker maak dat julle hierdie sessie bywoon, of wat is die bewys dat julle dit bygewoon het? Ek wil ook net seker maak ek rekord. Ja, ons gaan dan laat julle op die portaal gaan en dan registreer vir hierdie sessie. En dan, die oomblik wat jy dit gedoen het, dan is dit al 'n teken dat jy hier gesit het, want dit is hoe jy nou van hierdie inligting bewus raak, as jy sit hierso. So ek vra dat julle dit nie met mense gaan deel wat nou nie in die sessie sit nie. Dan gaan jy op die portaal onder events, en ek gaan dit nou sommer vir julle wys met screen share, en dan gaan jy 'n sertifikaat kry. So as jy gaan inteken op jou profiel, as jy nog nie weet hoe nie, gaan ek ook vinnig dit vir julle wys. En jy gaan na opleiding toe. Onder opleiding sal julle sien, daar is 'n hele reeks opleidingsgeleenthede wat ons aanbied, maar die heel boonste een, of die tweede een, ek sien my kollegas het klaar ingespring en hulle het hulle sin ook gemaak, so kom ons kyk het gewaar is, hier is hy, ontdek, ontgin en ontvou nuwe aanlyn vaardighede. Dan klik jy op sien, en as jy op sien geklik het, gaan jy na registreer, jy kies die geleentheid se naam, jy kies die pakket, en dan prys is uit die aard van die saak gratis, en jy sê bespreek, en dan gaan ons na die tyd net die boksies tik, en dan gaan die sertifikaat vir jou lê onder hulpbronne. So julle sien, daar is 'n lertjie wat sê sertifikaat, en dan gaan dit daar lê. Dit neem so 7 werksdae, so asseblief wees geduldig, maar julle het net tot die einde van Februarie om julle sertifikate te kry. Ok, dan het ons net vinnig, wil ek vir julle wys my profiel. So ek is Johan. Ek het nou ingeteken as iemand wat deel is van die Vereniging van Afrikaanse Wiskundeonderwysers, maar dieselfde is waar vir Afrikaans en vir wetenskap en meeste van die ander vakverenigings. As jy gaan na hulpbronne, sal jy sien, onder hulpbronne is die hulpbronne wat ons hierdie jaar bied vir ons onderwysers. As ek net byvoorbeeld gaan na wiskunde, dit is alles gratis, ons gee vir julle van 2018 tot 2021 se hulpbronne. So as jy op 2021 sou klik, al die grade waarvoor jy geregistreer het, kom ons sê ek vat graad 5. Ons sit verlede jaar se gestandardiseerde eksamens vir julle daar neer, wat 'n baie waardevolle hulpbron is. En dan onder kwartaal 1 sal jy sien, is 'n legio hulpbronne, werkkaarte, ondersoeke, toetse, projekte, opdragte, wat ook al die huidige kurrikulum vereis. So ek dink dit is regtig iets sinvol om aan deel te neem. Dit is slegs R264 per lid, per vakvereniging per jaar. Ons spreker vir die dag. So Mike, now I'm going to go into my English version. It is not my mother tongue, and it's usually only a language I speak in self-defense, but I'll do my best. I'm most probably going to mix up some is's and r's, so you'll forgive me, and I hope our members do as well. So I'm just going to read a short bio from Mike. So Mike Flynn is the Director of Mathematics Leadership Programs at Mount Holyoke. I don't know if I pronounced that correct. Okay, like I'm not going to try. And then yoke. Holyoke. Okay, good. That's easy. College. He runs the Master of Arts in Teaching Mathematics program and creates a wide variety of professional learning for educators looking to become leaders in mathematics education. Mike was one of the first educators to use Zoom back in 2013. I didn't even know Zoom was available in 2013 to design interactive lessons. Presently, Mike is supporting teachers and school districts around the world in creating engaging online learning experiences for students. You can visit the distance learning support to learn more about Mike's work in this area. You can follow him on Twitter at MikeFlynn55 and subscribe to his YouTube channel. He posts tips and resources to support both remote teaching and learning, as well as support for mathematics educators. From my side, Mike, I want to thank you for taking out the time. Usually, Mike addresses audiences of 5,000 more. I remember, I think it was last year, a year before, I went to NCTM and there was a talk that he gave, and it was a jam-packed. It was sort of like a stadium. It was big. It was very big. So that was the first time I saw him, and then I followed him on Twitter, and he engaged with me when I reached out. So I want to thank you. I think our teachers really do appreciate it. Currently, we have 332 teachers logged in. But as I told you, multiple of the schools only have one PC in the staff room, and then the whole staff would sit around that PC. So Mike, I'm going to give over to you. The main reason why we are speaking in English is because he's from America, the United States, and it's currently 4 a.m. where he's at. So thank you for waking up very early. Thank you, Mike. Over to you.
Yeah, no, like people sometimes would be shocked at 4 a.m., but my normal wake up time is between 3:30 and 4. So this is actually normal for me. I'm an early riser. I go to bed really early as well. The one thing I didn't plan was last night I did some work for teachers in Los Angeles, California, which is on the West Coast. So I had to stay up later than I wanted to. And then I had the early thing here. So it's if I have a little bit of bags under my eyes, you all understand why. But thank you all for jumping in. I'm going to do a couple of quick things. So you're going to notice probably right out of the gate that things look different the way I'm facilitating here. You've probably seen the people share their screens. It feels like a webinar during Zoom, but it looks like, people often say it looks like I'm in the news show or something. I've got my picture over here. I can actually switch between going full screen and then come back here. I can go to a production shot if you want to see. This is sort of what it looks like on my end, a little bit behind. And I know Johan was asking about, like, would I be able to show people how I'm doing this this effect where I can actually have my screen here and then throw my slides right inside here. So I'm going to show you actually 3 ways to do this, because usually when I do presentations to audiences, they want to figure out how this is how you can do this. So you can do it with your students, or if you're doing professional learning and you want to do it with your audience, you're able to do that. I will say I started to figure this stuff out when I realized how frustrating it was for me as a teacher when I'm doing a class and I have to share my screen and I lose my audience. I don't see them anymore, whether I'm teaching kids or I'm teaching adults. When the audience disappears and I'm talking over my slides, it feels very impersonal. And I feel like as an audience member, it's also like that. I love it when I can see the presenter and I can see their slides. And if there's something really big that's important, we can shift over and see something really large. And then more often I want to default to where you can see my face. And typically in a Zoom meeting, I would see your faces. So that's why I started to figure this out. What you're seeing right now is my high-tech way of doing this. And so I'll give you the quick tour. Let me get the picture-in-picture off for a second. So it's actually not expensive equipment in terms of, I'm not buying professional grade equipment here. What you're seeing is these 2 things right here, this little blinky thing here and this little box. I'm going to write what they are in the chat, but they're what, if any of you are familiar with it, I don't know if this is a United States phenomenon, but teenagers today like to play video games, but they live stream themselves playing video games and other people watch them, which I can't imagine when I was a teenager wanting to sit and watch other people play video games. That sounds really boring, but it's a thing. And so the equipment that I got here, one is called an ATEM Mini, which is a switcher. And then put the other one in here. And the other one's called Stream Deck. So the switcher, the way this works is it allows me, so this thing right here allows me to hook in different devices using HDMI cables. So I have my laptop with my presentation on it. This is hooked in here, and this switcher thinks it's camera 2 or camera 3. This is, so it's, my laptop's actually seen as a camera. What you're looking through right now on here, that is my iPad. That's camera 2. And then my camera 1, if I can go ahead and do this, is right above that TV right there. So you can see the camera, that's camera 1. So I have 3 cameras in here, and it allows me to switch between camera 1, camera 2, and camera 3, which is this. Now, the other thing the switcher lets you do is you can also say that while camera 1's on, you want camera 3 also on in the picture, and then you can make that size anything you want. So my the way I set it up is I have camera 3, which is my laptop, picture in picture, and I just resized it so it fit here, and then I just scooch myself over a little bit and I sit in this space. So that's how I do it this one way. This for the cost of those, if people are curious, so each of those is about $200 US dollars for it. So I wouldn't recommend buying it unless you're going to do this work all the time. It's not worth it for remote teaching. There's a free and easy way to do it. So let me show you the other way. Here we go. Here's the other way. It's going to be a little glitchy because I don't use my green screen the way I used to. When I do virtual backgrounds behind me, I'll actually light up the background and make sure I have uniform color so you don't get some of these like black areas. Those are shadows that are causing that. So what you're seeing right now is the virtual background feature in Zoom. So this I figured out really early in the pandemic, and I was really excited because I think I was the first one to figure this out and start sharing it. The virtual background feature is something people use to just make their background interesting. So you could put yourself in the grass, on the, in space, whatever you want. And I started to think, if you could put images behind you, could you, of like whatever you want, could you export your slides as images and then put that behind you? So I was all excited. So I took my slideshow, just a regular one, and I exported the entire thing as pictures. And then I put it behind me. And I discovered a problem, which is, the first thing is I'm sitting right in front of my slide. So I'm like, oh, that doesn't work. And then I'm like, well, what if I could resize my slide, what I put on my slides and make it fit up in the corner? And so that's where I came up with this idea. So the blue that you see behind me, if you were to think of PowerPoint or Google Slides, or I use Keynote, but the blue is the background of the slide. So everything behind me is a full slide from my slide presentation. But then what I did is I made a little box and I put it up in the corner, and then I put all my slide information on that box. And so that's how I do that. And then once I make my slideshow with the slides up in the corner, I export it as a picture. And then in Zoom, you use the virtual background feature and you add these images and they go in order. And then you just click through the different pictures. So if I want to advance through a slide, I can just go ahead and I click on this picture, then I click on this picture, then I click on this picture, and I'm advancing my slides. What I kind of like about this versus the way I'm doing it now is this way I can put my hand over it. So it's not really here. So if you've ever seen like the meteorologist, there's nothing here. So I'm kind of pretending. It's like the way if movies are made and everything's shot with green screen, the actors are pretending there's a dragon right there, even though there's not. I'm pretending there's a slide right there, even though there's not. So when I'm presenting this way, and I can actually not touch, but mimic the touching of a slide, I'll actually make it appear as if I'm looking at that slide for my audience. So what I might say if I was working with students is to say, to ask them to look at these problems. So I want you to look at all of these things right here. And I'll actually look over to the screen, because it makes the students or the audience for you feel more like you're immersed in a reality, even though this is all an illusion. So that's how I do that. And let me just share my screen for 1 second so you can see what it looks like from the end of a facilitator. So share, I got to open this first. Hold on. The only thing that this costs you to do the virtual background is time, because you got to redo your slides. That's the only thing. But to me, it's worth it for the audience. So you should see right now the. Are you able to see this? Can you see my slides where my cursor's over that?
Yes.
Okay, good. So this is what it looks like in virtual background. So you do the little plus sign. Here are my actual slides, and they show up in order. So when I'm clicking through my slides, I'm just clicking through the different pictures here and advancing my slides, and that way I stay right in front of it. So that's a little bit there. The last one, if you're curious, Zoom does have an ability to do virtual backgrounds by uploading your PowerPoint or your Keynote slides into Zoom, and it makes you smaller. I'll show you what it is. If you go to share screen when you're in Zoom, and you normally just share screen and it opens up all the windows that you could possibly click on. there's an advanced button up at the top that a lot of people don't pay attention to. I would encourage you, for all the features in Zoom, anytime you see an advanced button, click on it, because there's some nice little gems in there. One of the options says slides as virtual background. So I'm going to do that right now and just show you one quickly that would be interesting to, let me go ahead and load one up. So you'll see that. And let's see, here we go. Okay, I'm going to open up the slides. So this is an assessment session I give. It's loading it into Zoom, and you're going to see something now where I should show up on the screen. Now, depending on how your view is, this is why I don't like it. Some of you may be seeing the full screen, so you can see a boy doing some learning at home. I'm kind of sitting right in front of him, and I can present my slides. So I can actually advance through and walk through the slides, kind of talk about assessment. If I'm in the way, I can move my picture out of the way. And so that's kind of how I look. Oops, let me grab it here and get myself out of the way. I can move myself to the corner. I can make myself smaller. And so I'm in the slides here. I'll just say really quick, if you use this feature, it is also free, but depending on the audience, if they're looking at it on a phone, if they don't have the latest update, they may not see it. And so I don't like to do things where the audience might not have access. So that's just a little bit. Those are 3 ways that you can present in front of your slides. And I think it's worth it. I mean, a lot of what I try to do in remote and hybrid teaching is recreate what it's like to be in the classroom. I want people to feel like they're sitting right there. And that's what I've been doing. I've been designing this work since 2013. What you're seeing in the picture right here is hybrid learning at my graduate program, pre-pandemic, obviously no masks, but we have people who are working on campus with hands-on materials. And on that iPad, we've got someone who's in Mozambique, someone who's in Kenya, someone who's in Seattle, Washington, in the United States, all doing the same math. So we've really focused on recreating the face-to-face experience. And my graduate students will tell you that it feels like they're sitting right there, the way we design it. So I want to teach you some of the things that we've learned to make this work really well, both for fully remote, but also if you go to hybrid learning, because the hybrid learning model I designed is a bit different. And I was telling Yohan earlier that what I do before I got in education, I majored in video production. So that helped me sort of think about how to do this, but I'm also a teacher. So what I've done is I've designed ways to make this hybrid model work for people who aren't comfortable with technology. And then you can scale up to your whatever your comfort level is. But I want a nice, easy access point for everybody so that it's not overwhelming. So let's start by the actual session, because this wasn't talking about the virtual background wasn't my original start. My normal start for a session is to begin with an activity. And so I'm going to have us do a task together. Now, this is in a Zoom meeting. What I would do is put you in breakout rooms to do this. Now, we're in a webinar style, so you're going to need to work alone in some ways where you're not talking to people, but I would encourage you in the chat to share some of your strategies and things. So this is a quick warm-up. The wall game is an adaptation I made of a paper pencil game that you could use. So what it is it's a maze. So if you look at the wall right now, you'll see that you can enter the maze and you're going to pass through a colored barrier. So it could be red or blue when you go through them. So you're going to enter through a red barrier. The way this works is you can pass through red and blue barriers, red and blue walls. But the rule is if you go through a red wall, you can't go through another red wall until you go through a blue wall. Likewise, if you go through a blue wall, you can't go through another blue wall until you go through a red wall. So let's take a peek at this. I made this work for Google Slides. So the first thing you're going to do is use the scribble tool in Google Slides. So I'm going to drop in the link so people have access to this in a minute. If you're not familiar with the scribble tool, I'll show you right up here where you see the shapes in Google Slides. Right next to it is all your line tools, and there's a little arrow here. And if you click on that, the last option that comes down is scribble, and that lets you click and draw. And so you could actually draw your path through the maze. The rules, as I said, is first, you can't pass through the same color wall twice. So if you pass through red, you can't go through red again. That's a mistake. The other thing is that the maze has brick walls in there. You can't pass through any of the brick walls. If you go through them, you're going to get stuck. So, and yes, this the PowerPoint, this would work in PowerPoint and everything. So you're not, you don't just have to use Google Slides. I use Google because it works for lots of different districts. When you get to the when you get to the solution of the maze, put in the chat that you did it. Let us know. But what we'll do is I'm going to drop in the chat now the link for this actual activity so you can try it. As I said, normally what we would do is make this like a contest. So breakout rooms would play against each other and try to see which group could get it finished first. And I'd like you to think about as you play it, what might this, if your students did this, here we go, dropping in the chat now. This is going to force you to make a copy of this. And what you can do is click on that link. And then when you click on the link, you can actually open the file and you'll be able to go ahead and try this. So let's take a moment to open it up. Go ahead and work through the maze we'll just do this for a couple of minutes. But as you do that, I want you to reflect on what would starting a class, whether you were in person or you were doing hybrid where some were in class and some were in person, what would it be like for students if this is how the class started? For the first 5 minutes, a little warm up where they got to collaborate on this. So this is what we're doing. The reason I start with something like this without typically giving the answer is there's something in psychology known as the peak end rule. So the peak end rule talks about engagement and sort of how people judge experiences. So what it says is that humans, all of us, doesn't matter what country we're in, doesn't matter our age, we will judge an experience often on how we felt during the most intense moments of it and at the transitions, the beginnings and the ends. So we have positive experiences. So we might have like a peak that's a heightened happy experience. We might have pits, which are negative experiences. And then there's, of course, the transitions, the beginnings and the ends. So an example in life is you may go to a restaurant and the restaurant has a really long line because it's super popular and everything. And so that trip to the restaurant, that's a negative part of that experience. When you get up to the counter, the proprietor of the establishment is super rude and is not nice to you at all. And that's also kind of a pit moment. But when you get outside and you try the soup, it is so good that you have to sit down. That's how good the food is. And so when you think about that, that would be on the positive side of an experience and such a heightened part of it. So even though there were some negative elements of going to this restaurant, because how great the soup was so strong that if you were to think back to that restaurant trip, you would probably remember it positively because of that strong, intense feeling. Well, when we think about remote learning, and I'll even argue for teaching in general, if we were to draw a line on how our students would sort of rate their experiences in terms of either positive or negative as they went through a remote learning lesson, I'd like you to imagine what that line would probably be. And I've asked a lot of students to do that. And here's a version of mostly what I see for kids. There's some little bumps there, but for a lot of parts, for teachers and for students, remote learning hasn't been really exciting for them. And so one of the things that if we think about in psychology, that if people remember the beginnings and the ends of events, one thing to consider as teachers is how are we starting our classes? Do our classes start with homework review? Do they end with homework being assigned? And if so, those are two moments that we're missing for engagement right now, which is one reason that I wanted to start with something like a wall game, even though I gave you the answer, but to build in some excitement. There might be pits, tech challenges, lecture, worksheets that happen in there. So these things are all things that don't make the experience really good. As teachers, we want our students to be engaged. We want our students to be interested in and to develop a love of learning. And so what we need to do is think about how we build peaks. That doesn't mean that we're going to necessarily get rid of the pits, but I would recommend that we sort of burn off our standard ways of opening and closing classes and thinking about how we might start with an engaging routine. And then bring in like other things that we can do, collaborative challenges, any interactive tasks, even consider giving kids the night off of homework once in a while. That would be a nice little boost for kids. But when we do this, when we build peak moments, what's happening then is we're creating what's known as a moment of elevation for students. And elevation for all of us as adults and as kids is it's a heightened experience for us, which actually makes learning better, makes it easier. Our emotions are sort of control our presence for learning. There's been enough research around the ties with anxiety and blocking working memory. If kids feel anxious, their working memory can get blocked. They can't access the information they know. It makes it more difficult. If students feel relaxed, if they feel like they're comfortable, that they can take a risk, that they can put themselves out there and try something new without fear of getting it wrong, that feeling makes it a lot easier for someone to be present for learning. And so building peak moments is something that we can do to make that happen. There's a recipe for it. And this comes from the book, The Power of Moments by Chip and Dan Heath. And they say to build peak moments, what you can do is boost sensory appeal, raise the stakes, and break the script. And what they mean by that is boosting sensory appeal. I mean, we're sensory creatures. That's how we see the world. We interact with our senses. So if you can make something multisensory, even in the remote learning world, that's going to create a more heightened experience. Raising the stakes means asking more investment on the part of your students. So if I were to just lecture, in some ways, a webinar like this today is like that. I'm not really raising the stakes too much for you, although you're going to see that I'm going to do that in a second. I'm going to try. But right now, you're a passive audience. You're listening to me. You're watching me. You're watching my slides. I want you to interact. I want you to collaborate. I want you to be challenged. And so I'm going to put opportunities in here for that to happen for you. That's raising the stakes. The more you invest of yourself into a lesson, the more engaging it is. And then finally, breaking the script. And breaking the script means to just do something that's unexpected, that sort of disrupts people's normal schemas for the way the world works. So for example, if kids are normally used to coming in and they do homework review, or they do a do now, or whatever people call these sort of opening things where kids work independently. If your students come in and the first thing they do is go into breakout rooms to figure out the wall game with the solution taken off, make sure you all delete that last drawing, by the way. But if they come in and that's the first thing they do, and there's a challenge, that breaks the script. So when you do things differently, it'll create a more memorable experience for students. That doesn't mean that you want to constantly jump from one new thing to the next. This is when we talk about these kind of moments, they're moments. They're not all the time. You can't be doing that all the time. Otherwise it sort of loses the nature of like breaking the script. If you're always changing it up, then changing it up becomes the routine. And so that's kind of what I'm suggesting here. So let's try something. I'm going to do a task now that doesn't have the answer. And this is something that I'm going to use all three parts: boost sensory appeal, raise the stakes, and break the script. And let's go ahead and give that a shot. So we're going to watch a video. This video is just a few seconds long, and it's, let me switch to full screen so you can see. I want you to watch the video and then put in the chat what you notice and what you wonder. All right. I'll show it one more time with picture in picture, but go ahead and put in the chat what you notice and what you wonder looking at that video. Yeah, that's my office, actually. I didn't realize, yeah, the doorknob is low. Either that or I'm super tall, right? Which is it? That's it. What's the black box? Good. Now, if you notice in the chat, so some people are noticing, and if you didn't write in the chat, some people will notice things about the money, and some people will notice things about the background and things. This is all interesting when we do this with students. And so thinking about the money, though, what questions are you wondering about the money? So it is real money, but there's the big one. How much money was used? So I've rolled out all this money, and how much money was used? That's what we're going to try to figure out right now. So for this task, I'd like you to think about what information you would need from me to calculate how much money is being used. I'm not going to just tell you. I want you to use math to figure it out. But if we're going to use math, what would you need information? What information do you need from me? All right. So we can do like the size of the bills, how long the bills is, and how long the whole roll is. I like that. All right. Let me give you that. So here's the length of a bill. There we go. I'll go nice and close for you so you can see. There's the length of a bill. How would you describe the length of a bill with these units? Let's get agreement on this. And there might be disagreement on this, by the way, because we're going to look for a precise description of it. So 8 units, 8 blocks, 8 units, something like that. We don't know the length of these blocks, so we can't say that it's like, we can't use standard units. Now, is it exactly 8 units long? So as I zoom in a little bit, yeah, right. So it's not quite, right. So it's a little more than 8 units long, just a little bit, but that's the length. We're going to say that the length of a US dollar bill is just a little bit more than 8 cubes long. The length of the entire roll is exactly 179 cubes long. So knowing that, you're welcome to solve this any way you want using calculators. You can do handwritten arithmetic, whatever you want to do. I'd like you to figure out how many whole bills are in that entire roll. And there's no bills that were torn. It's a full amount. And it exactly does measure 179 cubes. There's not like a bill hanging off or cubes hanging off. So I'd like you to take a moment to calculate that and then put your answer of how many bills do you think there are in the roll after you do your calculation. And it's likely after you do your calculation that you're going to have to do a little bit more thinking. Because sometimes people might notice when you look at the roll and when you look at the entire roll with the cubes on it, each of those cubes is in stacks of 8. And people start to notice that it looks like there's misalignment as the bill gets longer or as the roll gets longer, the cubes start like scooching back. So if you look at that blue stack right there, you'll see that it's almost halfway between the dollar bills. And so you'll see in the chat, and this happens every time I do this task, that we'll have a range of answers. If I asked you to just solve the arithmetic problem, you'd all probably have the same answer. But now that we have this contextualized problem, we're getting different answers. Yeah. So there's a lot of ranges here. Okay. So with that, now I will say in a classroom, if I was in the Zoom webinar space or Zoom meeting space, we would be in small groups and you would have to craft a mathematical argument with your team. You would need to use the slides. You would have to then show images and write a defense on why you think it's 23. Why is it 21? Why is it 22? And give a defense for these strategies. We would come back into the main meeting room. You would present your arguments. So the students, whether they're graduate students that I work with, or when I've done this with second grade all the way through high school, it's a debate. They've got to present. There's counter arguments. There's a lot of pressure, and that's raising the stakes. And then finally, we'll go ahead and do the solution. So I'm going to go ahead and share the solution now for you, so you'll have it. Because in the webinar space, we can't actually have those math arguments. But for now, what we'll do is just watch the final solution here. And there it is, 22. And that's the end. That's what the end of the roll looks like. If people were wondering, like, where's that 3/8 in there? You can see those 3 last cubes. There's the 3/8 at the end. So it does, like, the roll or the measurement does scooch back a little bit. That little bit of space does accumulate over time, just not enough to make another bill. It's actually just the 3 cubes there. So what this task does, though, is this is an example. I wanted you to see how in remote learning, we can build a peak moment, boosting sensory appeal. This was a visual-based task. We raise the stakes by asking students to make arguments, justify their thinking. They have to collaborate. There's different answers. There's always different answers. So there's this pressure of who's right. And then we break the script, because I didn't give a word problem to say a roll of dollar bills was taped together, basically do 179 divided by 8 and write your answer. Instead, I made this interactive. So this is an example of how I approach remote teaching, and it gives you a lens into my philosophy in this work. So my core belief in remote teaching is that good online teaching, whether it's hybrid or fully remote, is built upon good teaching. Like there's no such thing as like, this is how you teach online, which is very different than how you teach in person. People approach it that way, and I think that's why we have not so great online teaching. There's an assumption that because we're online, we need to do webinar, we need to do lecture, we need to just tell kids things and assign kids things, and not build in that engagement. And I'm telling you that when I was hired at Mount Holyoke College, This, what you're seeing here, is a picture of what the program was like. The thing that made the graduate program that I took over, it's a math program for kindergarten through high school math teachers. It's people would fly to campus. They stayed on campus, and then they did all this work together. It was interactive, dynamic, collaborative, all of that. When they hired me, they said, I need to figure out how to recreate this experience online. And at the time, this was back in 2012, the online courses were like MOOCs, and they were like these message boards and things. And I thought, there's no way you can really do that. Like, you might use Adobe Connect or something, but there was nothing that allowed for this kind of interaction. And I was lucky that when I was hired, there was this startup company called Zoom that some of you might have heard of. And so I got connected with them, and I started looking at how we could use Zoom, which was really rough in the early days. I'll just tell you, it doesn't have all the bells and whistles it had now. To do breakout rooms, I had to buy 6 accounts. And then each new account that I made was a different breakout room. So I would actually send people to a different account, and I'm managing like multiple accounts just to recreate breakout rooms. So that's what the early days was like. But what I found was that Zoom let that happen. So a little bit of what I am going to share today is what dynamic hybrid learning is, so you get a vision for that, but how you can also see how we weave in things like the wall game or a math task like this to build in that interaction. So this is the very first dynamic hybrid learning. By the time I was ready to launch, it was in 2014, but you'll see it's not overly complicated. Everything's going off my laptop, and I've got one little webcam. That's it. We're all seated up. We're projecting the participants on the screen. That's all. When we first did it, we made a ton of mistakes, and it was overwhelming. But at the same time, there was things that we learned. One of the first things I learned at this stage of the game was I'm such a perfectionist that I want things to be a production. I want it to be perfect. Like the fact that I share the answer to the wall game is going to bother me for a while, because I really want that level of ease in the space. And I was so obsessed with making this really perfect that when things didn't go right, it was really hard for me to teach in that space in the beginning. By day 2, though, this small group that we were testing it with said, Mike, this doesn't, like, we can figure this out together. So let us work with you. And that just changed everything. I realized that in this space, especially when you're new to hybrid or online, you don't have to you're not putting on a live performance that needs to be perfectly scripted. What you're doing is you're engaging, and we're real. And so having feedback from your students actually will free you up from the pressures of having to hold on to everything so tightly. And once we did that, it was game over. I was able to actually just go all in, and it got better because of what they were able to tell me. They were able to help me think about what makes it easier to see, what makes it easier to hear. And then since then, everything's kind of changed for us. It's blown up. We're doing this all the time now. So everything that we've learned that works in hybrid learning, we also found works in dynamic learning, dynamic online learning. And the reason I call it dynamic is because we want things shifting and moving and stuff. Now, I will be honest and say that one thing that happens, and this is one of the tips that I'll often give people, is that in remote teaching, and especially in hybrid teaching, in order to do this well, you have to really think about how we reduce the cognitive load on the instructor and on the students. So when I started to train my staff, so this was fine when I developed this, and I could teach in the hybrid learning space back then. But when I shifted to now having my staff of 30 learn how to teach this way, I learned really quickly that I overwhelmed them. Like, it was just too much techie stuff. And so I really had to think about reducing the cognitive load. And I want to teach you how to do this. So I'm going to show you how you could teach some kids in person and some kids online in a way that makes it feel like everybody's in the same space while also reducing people's cognitive load. So if you think about just what the cognitive load is like for teachers in a general, every day is really good, and we're pre-pandemic or post-pandemic, a regular lesson for a teacher, they're going to have a lot of information in their heads about students and equity, access, timing, all those things are in there. Now, when remote teaching happened, all of a sudden, everyone's now home, and on top of all those other things in their head, they have all the tech stuff, Google, sharing screen, annotation, camera, all this stuff is now another thing you're thinking about while still trying to think about your lesson and the students and all of that. Now, what's difficult here is that this stuff's now all rattling your head and usually takes center stage. The defense mechanism that we have is that when you're overwhelmed as an educator and you're trying to manage the tech and you can't really think about the lesson so much, the default way that you protect your ability to think without burning out is that you reduce the planning and the emphasis on the lesson. And so we saw with the pandemic that a lot of people reverted to lecture-based teaching practices because they needed to focus on the technology. The way we get back into focusing more on the engagement piece and less on the technology is we need to develop simple routines, structures, habits of mind so that we can offload some of that technology and really free up our brains to think about the more important things, which is the lesson, the learning, the assessment, all of that. And so I want to show you how we can offload some of this stuff. A lot of what I try to do is simplify things, and I want to share that process with you. So here we go for next advice. So let's keep it simple. To make sense of hybrid learning, and actually to some degree remote learning, but hybrid learning, I want to show you what I mean when I say keep it simple, is start by visualizing the absolute bare bone basics of what hybrid learning is. So right now we're starting with in-person learning. That's the thing that we all understand. We have a teacher and we have in-person students. That's it. There's the main thing that we have. When we have hybrid learning, we're introducing an online student. So I ask people, if you're going to start thinking about teaching both audiences, don't think about a whole class. I want you just to visualize, what would this be like if you had one kid online, one kid in person, and you with your computer? How would you engage them? And I want you to think about that. How would you engage them right now? Sorry, there we go. What would you do? In the chat, you could kind of put through what would be some things you would do if you were sitting in a classroom with one kid and there was another kid on home who was zooming into that class on your computer. Where would you put your computer? Where would you put yourself? How would you organize your classroom so that the kid online and the kid in person can collaborate? You can work with them. You can see and hear each other, all of those things. I'd like you to think about that for a minute. You can write some thoughts. Oh, is my sound going softer and softer?
Yes, when you move your head to your left.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Here we go. Sorry. Dynamic microphone. Okay. Let me go direct in. That should be better. So what we have here is I want you to think about how you might set that up. Yeah. Shared screens is an idea. And I also want you to think of how would you set it up in the classroom so that the student who's at home zooming in feels like they're sitting right there? How do you recreate some of the in-class experiences? That's the starting point. And usually when I ask teachers to think about that, it's pretty easy to think about managing one kid online and one kid in person. You've got a lot of flexibility. From there, I want you to scale up. I want you to imagine 5 kids online, 5 kids in person. What are you going to do differently? So we're going to spread things out, right? In class, you've got to have masks and social distancing. But as you imagine everything just working off of a computer, we're not even talking about cameras and microphones right now, just talking about like scaling up the audiences. You're going to start looking at your classroom differently. This is what I'm getting at. So when I go to any classroom, when I'm setting up hybrid learning, I'm trying to build off of that model of I want to have my in-person students and my online students see each other. And I want to be able to teach from a spot where I can see everybody. So the first thing I'm going to do is find where the students are going to be projected, and I'm going to put my camera there. So in this case, I'm going to go right off my laptop. That's my camera. And so I have the camera right in front of where the TV is. And that means that anytime I look at where the kids are projected, I'm looking at the camera. Same with the kids in person. Likewise, when the kids online are talking and we're looking at them, our eyes are all on the camera, no matter if we're talking to them or they're talking to us. I also need to figure out where the camera's picking up when I have it here. So I've got my laptop sort of off in the corner. This spot where I'm standing gives me a place where I can teach and still see the online students and see the in-person students. And so this might be my main teaching spot. So here's where some of my tips and tricks come in. So in a classroom, if you're going to do hybrid learning in the classroom where you're going to be moving around your room, one thing to get, if you can, is some tape that doesn't leave adhesive. This is what we call painter's tape here in the States that painters use, but it's meant to take off without ripping tape off or paint off or leaving adhesive on the floor. But use this to actually mark off where you're actually going to teach. So go ahead and get that painter's tape or gaffer's tape, whatever you call it, and make a box. And the box is, as you position your camera, this is before the kids are in the classroom, move left and right, forward and backwards, and see how much room you have to move before you're off camera. And then, yeah, masking tape would work too. And so you do that on the floor. So you create a box on the floor, a square, and anytime you stand in that square, you're on camera. So what we've just done is we've taken the pressure off of trying to figure out where you're standing. If teachers are doing hybrid learning, if they don't have a system of where static spots of where they're going to teach and where the camera is going to be positioned, you're going to constantly have to think about the camera angle and whether it's close enough and you can be heard and all of that. That's going to cloud out your thinking about the lesson. So I recommend people start with a spot. Find a spot where you can be heard and you can be seen, and then teach from there. When you get comfortable with that, we could start to add layers to it. As I said, we start to add layers. And so what we might do is realize we can also find another teaching spot. We can turn our computer into a different direction, follow the same spot. So now I have 2 teaching spots that I've marked. So now from this move, I'm going to make sure that I have, that I've actually marked off the other spot of the room, but I'm also going to recommend that you get tape or you do some kind of marking on the table as well, so that you actually, let me just kind of show here. If you see up where the laptop is, put a little bit of tape up there to show the 2 different camera positions, so that you don't even have to think about where you need to position your laptop. As long as you align it to where the tape is, you'll know that it's right where your squares are. So when I did this with my staff, once we started to mark off the room, they just said it just took so much out of their head. All the pressure was off. They just knew they had a couple of teaching spots, and that works really well. So at this point, I mean, this is still, we're just going off of our laptop. We're not using fancy equipment. We can start to add to this. So if we brought in additional equipment, so one thing I use is a conference room microphone. This is the actual one I use. It's called MXL Procon series. It's like a $60 microphone in US dollars, but I'll put that on into my computer. What that allows me to do is it gives me a little bit more flexibility, because when I'm using this, this microphone here, I can lay it on the floor and it picks up the noise from everybody in the room. So the kids can be heard, I can be heard, and I don't need to be so close to my laptop, because I'm not going off my laptop microphone anymore. So when you add a new microphone, that just gives you better sound, but you don't need it. If you add a camera, that gives you a better picture, but you don't need it. The most important thing with remote and hybrid teaching is what you do in the lesson. I'll say this 100 times over and over again. I would much rather engage in a lesson that was interesting, that had some interaction, that was engaging, even if it was all grainy and delayed and like it was hard to see. If the work that we were doing was interesting and engaging, I would prefer that over a high definition, boring lecture any day of the week, because it's more about what we're doing and less about the technology. My belief is that technology supports good teaching. It doesn't create good teaching. And so if in order for you to teach well, if that means you should have less technology to worry about, then start simple and then work up from there. As you get comfortable, this is the way our brains work, is as you do something long enough, it's no longer occupying your working memory. It just becomes part of your long-term memory, and you're not so worried about it anymore. It becomes natural. So as you get used to like having 2 squares to teach in and setting this up, eventually you don't need to think about that anymore. Now you have some extra capacity to think about something else, like adding a microphone or something. Let me show you what this actually looks like in the setup now. This is a time lapse of me setting up this exact space that you're seeing. It's 30 seconds, but what you're witnessing here is what 5 minutes of setup was. I set up this hybrid space here in 5 minutes to work with about 250 teachers to teach them how to teach online during the pandemic. So I've got my mask on. The desks are all 6 feet apart. There's that microphone I put on the floor. Some people ask why I put it on the floor. I always start with the least obtrusive way to have that. Sometimes the floors are a nice position, position for the microphone. Sometimes though, like in this space, it was very echoey, so I ended up having to move it on top of a desk. But in general, there we go. I'm set up. I've got everything ready to go. Participants are starting to show up, and that's it. Notice that it's very low tech. I want to start with the easiest technology, so that way we're gonna scale up. Everybody can work off of a laptop. I don't want to show you how to do this with my studio setup because that makes it impossible. But let me show you what it looks like if you're online. So here's the actual session. I've got about 200 teachers online. I have about 12 teachers in person. We're all doing hands-on science right now. So we're going to do something with physics. We're actually folding this paper to make a propeller that they're going to be dropping and looking at math models and things like that. So we're doing complex instruction that's hands-on. Notice the people online also have the paper. They're folding. I'm looking at the camera, so I'm addressing them as if they're students. Notice also that if you look at the height of where the online or the in-person audience is, you're at the exact same height they are. So it feels as if you're sitting at the desk in the front of the room. This is what I'm trying to recreate here. And this is what people will say. It feels like I'm sitting directly in the room. I'm going to pause for a second before I get to the next piece of how to do some of this hybrid learning, but I'd love to field any questions. So Johan, do we have any questions at all that have come up that we want to tackle?
I think currently the cognitive load is very high, so we haven't even thought about questions. I'm just consuming.
And let me know though too, like if I'm overwhelming you all with stuff, because I know this is a lot of information. We are recording this so you can review it again.
Yes, definitely.
But if there's like, if I need to slow down or give less, let me know. It's I'm trying
to. That's perfect.
Okay, good. Just want to check in with folks, because I think that's also one of the things to think about with cognitive load is to make sure we're not doing that to ourselves as well. So let's now think about then how do we teach in this space. So we've got the tech set up. So I have a room. It's just my laptop. I'm standing in that little square and I'm teaching. I can see the online students. I can see the in-person students. We can see each other and we can talk to each other. So there is very little in this setup right here that is not allowing me to do this lesson that I normally would do face-to-face. It's all ready for me to, like, I'm doing the exact lesson the same way I would have taught it. And it works perfectly. Now, how do you facilitate in this space? So we've got this set up where we've got the cameras where we want it. But the other thing you need to think about is you need to teach kids how to actually participate in this space. And so I want to share with you my what we learned with the grad program, because I made some assumptions that ended up like we had to work through. The first assumption I made was that I worked with adult learners in my grad program, and I just assumed that when we did hybrid learning, they'd all figure out how to talk to each other online, and they don't. It's I actually had to scaffold it. And if you have to scaffold it with graduate students, you're going to have to scaffold it with K through 12, whatever grade levels you're working with. We need to actually teach them how to do that. The best way to build engagement, and if you're finding in remote teaching, your kids aren't participating, one reason is they likely don't know how. It's a whole different space for them. And so if you create experiences that encourage that participation, you're going to see that it gets easier. And this is going to scaffold it not just for your students, but for you as well. So my advice right out of the gate is start with an easy, light lift task. Start with something that doesn't have a lot of pressure. There's no grades associated with it. It's not even academic. And give processing time for individuals, and then for small groups. And the processing time is really important, because I think in education, we don't give enough processing time. I'm not even talking about the pandemic. If you think of the pacing of school, usually a teacher will ask a question and they're looking for a response within like 3 to 5 seconds. If there's not one, the teacher will ask another question, a follow-up question. And then often those questions, the kids that respond quickly because they have quick processing speed, often dominate the class. If you were to look at like data on who participates, you'll see that the kids that have faster processing speed participate significantly more. And it's not because kids with slower processing speeds don't want to participate, but as a person with slower processing speed, I can tell you right now that a lot of times when someone asks a question, and let me just define slower processing speed in case people aren't sure what I'm talking about. So we all take in information in our working memory, but we all do different things with that. Some people can really quickly and efficiently like sort that, make an instant sort of response, and then put that out there. I'm overly analytical. I've always been. I'm a slow reader because I'll reread things just because I want to remember everything I read. I do remember everything I read. My comprehension is very strong. My fluency for reading is slower because I'm a careful reader. I'm the same with math and everything else. I overanalyze. So when I take in information, I don't just take it on the surface. I start to like question things about it. And like, I start to try to connect it to things I understand. I try to make it an analogy to make sense of it. All of this is going on in my head. So by the time I process it and do all my thinking about it, the conversation's moved on because the kid that gave the fast answer has already responded. So one thing outside of the pandemic, I'd encourage people to think about wait time and how do we accommodate students who need a little bit more processing time. And I think sometimes there's been a negative stigma around students with slower processing speed as like that they're struggling learners, and that they come on, you got to get it quickly. It's learning's not about speed, and human interaction's not about speed. Like some people think faster, some people think slower, but we need to give space for everyone. And this is very true in the remote teaching space. So when I talk about scaffolding this work, I want you to give them something that they're going to talk about, but I want you to give them individual processing time so they can form their thoughts. And for the kids that think quickly and are ready with that immediate answer, one thing I think they benefit from is to reflect a little bit more, to rethink some of things. Because some people often will act on instinct and say the first thing that comes in their head, but there's a benefit in actually sitting on something for a little bit. So let's try this right now. Here's a task that I think is a light lift, doesn't require a lot of stress or anxiety and stuff, because there's no real right answer. So this is a would you rather. What would you rather have? And in the United States, and I don't know if this is the case in South Africa as well, but there's a phenomenon here around lottery tickets, and people buy, if you're a mathy, it's the worst investment. We often say lottery tickets are a tax on people who are bad at math, but there's these scratch off tickets where you scratch it off, and if you match your numbers, you're going to win some money. These are actually 2 tickets that you could win in the United States. One, you could win $500 a week for life. This other one, you could win $1 million. I'd like you to think, but don't put in the chat. Just think for yourself. This is your quiet processing time. Which one would you rather win and why? I'm going to give 30 seconds of just think time. And if you want, you could start drafting your answer in the chat, but don't hit enter yet. But we are going to share our responses in a moment. All right, that's our 30 seconds. So let's go ahead and feel free to share which one you want in the chat right now. I know we're not going to be able to replicate the conversation, but I'd love to see different ones. So infinite's greater than finite. That's interesting. I like that. Oh God, million. So we got a lot of reasons. I'd love to know some reasons why. So if you picked 500 a week for life, why? Why is that better than $1 million? Or why is $1 million better than 500? I want you to think about that. Now, we're not in the Zoom meeting, which means like what we're missing is at this point, after you did your processing, I would put you in a small group with 2 or 3 people, and you would do a turn and talk. This is a place where you have a small audience without like, it's just your peers, and you can have a conversation. You can say your argument, they can say theirs. What that does is it allows you to articulate, sort of rehearse your response. It also will validate it. So if you say, I think it should be 500 because I'm really young and I have good genes, I think I'm going to live to 100. So it makes the most sense. And someone says, that was a really good idea. That confidence that you get makes you feel more like, it makes you more confident to share in the whole group when we come back. You know, that's what the turn and talk does. So we do that processing time, self-processing, small group collaborative processing. Now we're going to get into scaffolding participation. So this is where we're teaching kids how to actually respond in Zoom and talk to one another. I have 3 methods. The first is very teacher-centric. This is mostly to help teachers not ignore one audience over the other. One of the things that happened with when I was training my staff is I had some people that just focused on the in-person students and ignored the online students. And then I had some people who were worried about ignoring the online students, so they overcorrected and only talked to the in-person students. So what I call the tennis method is where the teacher will begin by asking questions of a certain audience. So she may say, all right, let's hear from an online student first. Which one would you want and why? And then listens to the response. Then the teacher turns to the in-person students and say, all right, someone in class, tell me which one you would want and why. And so what the teacher ends up doing is if she's emceeing in a way the event, she's like the master of ceremony, she's the host, and it's everything goes through her. So it's teacher to student, then student back to teacher, and then teacher to another online student back to teacher. And it's not a conversation among class members, but it's a great way to get both groups of audiences talking. It's a nice, simple way. And if you just think about tennis method, it's back and forth, back and forth. That helps keep you focused on the audience. And so if we were doing this now, I would have, if some of you were here with me in person, I would just do that. I'd ask one of you to tell us what you want and why, and then we'd all listen. And then I'd ask someone online to tell me what they want and why. We can't replicate it here, but I think you can get an idea how that would go. The next stage is what I call the handoff. What I'm trying to get at with these stages is getting more and more of the kids talking to each other and getting myself out of the conversation. The teacher has a big role in the class, but sometimes we dominate. And so I'd like to get more teacher or more student voice. So the handoff is like the tennis method in that we pick one audience member, either online or in person to start. And then we ask the other audience to be the one that responds to it. And this is usually set up with two things at the same time. I'll say, for instance, I'd like someone online to share which ticket they would rather win, but don't share why. And then I want someone who's in class to actually give a reason why that would be a good choice. So what I'm setting up right now is that this online student can say she would like 500 a week for life. And then one of the in-class students can say, here's a reason why. She can invest the money or something like that. What this does is it allows kids to learn how to hand things off where teachers hand things off, where kids can now start to talk to each other without relying on the teacher to constantly be the one asking the questions. And one thing I will tell you with the handoff method is that as you start doing this, you're going to encounter lots of awkward silence. You're going to ask the question, you're going to ask for the handoff, and then it's just quiet. And you're going to be tempted to fill that space with your voice. I'm going to ask you to hold off. What I find is that sometimes 30, 45, and even 60 seconds of silence and wait time is really important. Everything in remote teaching does take a little longer, including your wait time. And we get uncomfortable with silence online because visual mediums like TV and movies, audio mediums like podcasts and radio, silence is deadly. You don't want to have any dead air in there. That's why you'll see, if you watch any television, even like a live sporting event. So if you watch like a football game, and so your favorite team is playing against Australia or something like that, so you're watching the match, but there's commentators who are constantly talking about the goalie, talking about like whatever controversies are happening on and off the field. They're just filling that up. So we're so used to that noise that in Zoom, it's still a visual medium. It's like television. You're almost doing a live TV show. When there's silence, it feels really awkward. And you can use that as a strength as a teacher. If you want kids to participate, get your voice out of there. That dead air is uncomfortable for them too. And let it linger. You'll be surprised when you set up tasks like would you rather, you'll get a little bit more participation earlier on, and kids get more and more comfortable with that. So that doesn't mean to do a stare down with them for 25 minutes. Like don't hang on forever. At some point you realize there's just nothing coming here. But then at that point, what you might do is, analyze like what's going on. Maybe the task was too tricky. Maybe they're, for whatever reason, you can try to think about how do you build more of that participation. But I find the wait time actually works really well. And then the last stage of this is what I call structured discourse, which is similar to the handoff, except it goes around and around and around. So online student responds, in-person students respond to them. Online student responds then we have an in-person student, and then we just go around and round as many times as you want. This is structured. So it's not authentic discourse. It's structured discourse, because what I'll give people is not a script, but sort of like roles. So I would post this for students and say, all right, we're going to have an online person share their choice and their reason why that scratch ticket's the right one. Then I want in-person to give a reason why it might not be the best choice. And then I want an online person to give a reason why it might give another reason why that might be a better choice. And then I want an in-person student to give a reason why that's not the best choice. So what I'm setting up here is a structure where the online students are sharing their ideas and justifying it, and the in-person students are are critiquing it. So they're the critical friend, right? They're giving and so it's set up where we've got this dynamic, and then you as a teacher just back out. And because they have a structure, the online students know I get to share an idea and why, and the in-person students know I'm going to listen to that idea and I'm going to poke holes in it, that the conversations can go. And because you're not injecting your voice at all, you stay out of it. The students start to learn that they don't need to rely on you. We're all creatures of habit. One of the things that happens with remote learning is people follow the structures and the norms. And so if up to now remote learning has been teacher-centric, if you record your Zoom sessions, there's a transcript of it. It automatically transcribes it. If you were to go through your transcriptions and quantify it, what percentage of time is your voice in the space? What percentage of the time are your students' voices in the space? It's likely like a 90-10 or something like that in a lot of spaces. So if kids are conditioned that teachers are going to run the session and that they passively wait for the teacher to call on them, and then they respond dutifully and then wait for their next turn to respond, it's not the same as having like a natural conversation, a back and forth exchange. And it won't happen unless you teach them how to do that, because they're conditioned now to sit quietly and raise their hand and wait for the response. So anyway, those are little things that I have on right now around building some participation. I'd like to open the floor to questions again, just because I don't want to constantly give a fire hose presentation. I'd like for you to be able to ask some questions. I know there was a few on there. I saw something
Mike,
about yeah.
I do have one here, and it's actually a very good question in terms of our foundation phase, which would be K to 3, I think, in the United States. Mm-hmm. Especially because we believe that younger children should actually learn through concrete interaction. So what do you propose if we have to teach foundation phase learners remotely? How would we go about it?
That's a great question. So one of the things I could show you right now, let me pull up a picture here. So here we go. Okay. So this is my colleague, Zach Champagne. He's a second grade teacher in Florida, and he's doing hybrid teaching right now. So you'll see he has the iPad. He has some of his second graders in class with masks on and things. I had to block out their faces for, obviously identity stuff, but they're wearing masks. He's wearing masks. They've got the iPad. There's kids online there, and it's hands-on. It's still concrete. So there's a few things that we do to make this work. So one thing is we want our students to have access to the tools that they need, and we know that they need to touch it. It's like digital tools are not easy for kindergartners to work with. It's okay in a pinch. It's better than nothing, but it's really helpful for kids to have blocks that they can manipulate. It's helpful for them to have any kind of concrete tools. So what we recommend is, if possible, schools that have been doing it, there's some schools in the States here that have pickup times. So they'll put together little packets, like a little bag of things that are from the classroom. So like the blocks and things for math, those are expensive and it's hard to send home. So what they'll do is they've cut out little pieces of paper. So one of the things that we use in math and in primary grades are base 10 blocks. So there's those like sticks of 10, and there's those little unit squares that stand for 1, and Then there's like a square that stands for 100. So the blocks themselves, I don't have any within reach here, but they, it's hard for teachers to give away a set because they usually have like a class set but it's not enough for individuals to all take home. So what teachers have been doing is they'll print out some copies on paper, cut out them, or just send them home and have the kids cut them out so that they have the strips and they have whatever squares and things which replicate the cubes. So that's one thing that teachers have been able to do, is do paper versions and then have students pick them up if that's possible. But logistically, depending on, like, if you're in a rural area, that's one of the big things where, like, if students are spread out and maybe they don't have as easy access to get to school, there's school districts here in the States that it's just not possible for them to do that. So the other thing we do is we start to think about what is the good substitute that might be within a student's house that would be a good stand-in for that. So one, like, for example, with young children, counting is a physical activity. We need them to actually be able to physically sort objects and count them, to build number sense and to be able to group things. That's why we use cubes and chips and things in the classroom. So what we do is we make an inventory list of what might be in students' houses that could stand in for that. So coins could be something. There might be coins. There might be game pieces that they have at their house. They might even have paper that they can just cut up into little pieces that can stand for that. And just having modified versions of physical tools at home are helpful. So what I'll usually do for my we call them primary grade students is, ideally, if I can get them the actual materials and it works, great. That's first thing. That doesn't work, I'm going to give them a stand-in. What's the next best thing that's still physical? If that doesn't work, I'm going to think then, what's the easiest way to do it digitally? And if that doesn't work, I'm going to have to alter my lesson to make it more accommodating. Typically, though, those first three things, you can usually get a stand-in and or a digital tool if you have to. But I always try to make it physical first. I try to avoid the digital tools as much as possible, but you can engage them. And what you'll see here with Zach and hybrid, what he's doing, like circle time is a big thing. I don't know if it is for you all in the young grades, but like, even I taught second grade for 14 years. The circle time is a big part. It's our morning meetings where we communicate. We do all of our morning, like, math routines and stuff. And so you can see Zach also use the iPad with his students so that they're part of circle time. Notice that they're actually at the floor level. Zach works for me. He's one of my staff that I taught how to do this. So it's nice to see him actually putting into practice some of the things I talked about. But his students who are online say it feels like they're sitting right there, and they have access to paper copies of the same tools that they have in the classroom. So it's been okay.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yes, just one more. Are you aware of any studies, or have you done any research yourself in terms of performance increase when it comes to the traditional face-to-face classes in the past versus the 100% online classes versus these hybrid models? Is there any difference in terms of output, if we could measure it like that?
Yeah, we did. So when I first started doing hybrid learning, there's a sponsored research department at the college I work in, and they teach a research methods class. There's one of the ed psych class does a research methods class, and they had their students and their professor did a study of our program for that. So what we were looking at is was there a learning difference from people who were in person and people online? And so the study, what they did is it was a blind study. So they didn't know which people were in person and which people were online. What they were looking at is the pre-assessment data and the post-assessment data. The grad course was a week-long intensive course. It met for 8 hours a day, which meant some people were online 8 hours a day. It was an intensive one. And so they looked at the pre-assessment data. We taught the course all the way through. We had half online, half in person. And then we had the post-assessment data, which is to show the growth within the learning targets that we set up in that course. And what they found was no discernible difference in the learning. It was like they couldn't tell. The learning was the same for both audiences. which was pretty striking. That's what we were hoping for. There was a little bit of other things they did with some qualitative data where they looked at exit surveys and things, feedback responses and stuff after they looked at the pre and post. So they had the numerical data to show no discernible difference between the audiences. When they looked at the qualitative data, though, because it was still early on, there were references from the online participants around some techie aspects that didn't work at times. And those were like, we tell our students, let us know what didn't work and how we can fix it. And so like, there was that element of it. So there was something around the tech side of things there was more hurdles that would pop up for an online student. But in terms of the learning outcomes, there was actually no discernible difference between the two in there. That was one study, and it's not an empirical study. It was done as part of a research methods course. So it's good enough for me to feel good about what we were doing, but I wouldn't say like, it's not going to be published out there. So, but that's the only study that we did for that right now. I actually would love, I wanted to get a grant from the Carnegie Mellon Foundation to do a full comprehensive study of this model. But the demands of my training time is so much that I can't even write a proposal. It's people need some help right now, and I want to be on the front lines helping people learn how to do this. So that's what I'm doing right now. All right. Any others?
No, nothing. Thanks. That was awesome.
All right, good. It's good to have a little bit of processing time so we can move in and take it to the next step here. So let's go with some other tips. And let me start with this one here. So this is something else that I would recommend, both in fully remote or in hybrid if you're going to do this, which is remember what I mentioned about television and how even though it's Zoom and it's a class, it's still it's media that we're doing, and we still have to abide by some of the things that work in media because it'll engage your students more. So one thing that we found is that to ensure you can periodically change your view for your online students, and this is whether you're doing it just by yourself at home or hybrid. Let's actually talk about this from the lens of live broadcasts. So these are two basketball games. We're going to watch both for 10 seconds. We're going to start with the one on the left. Then we're going to start with then we'll go to the one on the right. The one on the left, we're going to call clip number 1, just number 1. And the one on the right's clip number 2, just number 2. After you watch both, I want you to put in the chat 1 or 2, which one is more interesting to you to watch. Okay, here we go. Okay, number 2. All right, in the chat, put a 1 or a 2. Which one would you want? Absolutely, right? And I jokingly say, and the reason is because number 2 is the Boston Celtics. I'm from Massachusetts in the United States. That's my home team, the Boston Celtics. But it's not because it's the Celtics. So can someone put in the chat, why is number 2 more interesting? What's going on in number 2? Yeah, point of view changes. Thank you very much. Yeah, more personal. I love that you mentioned it as personal, right? Because you've got closer views, because it changed, it's drawing you in more. So I want you to consider that right now. The way you feel drawn in makes a huge difference. There's a thing that happens in media that our attention span craves novelty. That's why if you watch any movie or anything, if you were to watch it not to be immersed in the story, but just time it between when the camera changes view. So there's static camera shots and then there's dynamic camera shots. You'll find that sometimes it's 2 or 3 seconds that things are moving. And so in remote learning, one reason remote learning is hard is that you're often looking at the same thing over and over again. What I'm trying to do here, just even my setup, by like cutting from this to this, or cutting from this to this, and maybe going over here, back to here, I'm building in more views for you. And I'm just at my house. You don't, though, need to have fancy equipment to make that work. One of the things that I found really helpful, This is a inexpensive, we call these lazy Susans. I don't know what they're called elsewhere, turntables or things. These are things that we use in your household. Like you could put this in your cabinet, and if you had spices on it, it allows you to access things a little easier. My wife watched some kind of organization show and bought a bunch of these, and I was staring at them on the counter. This was during the pandemic, and I thought, could you put like your laptop on it and then like use it to like turn it into different directions? And turns out you totally can. And so this is my laptop in that classroom that you saw. And on that lazy Susan, it allows me to actually turn it side to side. Now, I hadn't plugged it in yet. I still can turn it side to side when it's plugged in. I can't go 360 degrees if it's plugged in. But here's what it looks like in the classroom. So imagine if I'm teaching and then someone on the other side of the room is talking and we're having a conversation. I could just turn the laptop on that lazy Susan, and now I can see them. Now the conversation's in the middle. I'll show you too. There was a question, I think, in the chat about like, what if you want to teach from the whiteboard? So I'm doing that as well. I like to use chart paper just because I never know when I go to these spaces. So I'm turning the lazy Susan over to where the whiteboard is, and I have my chart paper ready. I'll be honest, in this live setting right here, I didn't notice when I first started doing it that the chart was just a slight bit too high, so you can't see that first number. And so, but I taught everyone to advocate for yourself. So if you're online and you can't see something, unmute, interrupt, and say, Dr. Flynn, I can't see that. And then I'll lower it for you. So you'll see in a second, someone actually says it. And I'm like, oh, good. Thank you for letting me know. I bring it down. So it's not the end of the world if things aren't perfect there. And so now we're able to have a conversation about this. Everyone in person can see that chart paper. Everyone online can. And what the people online said is it felt like they just turned their head. That's what it was like. So that's a way you can change the view. The other thing you could do to change the view is you can use a secondary device as a second camera. Now, I know some people worry about hooking up your phone or other things to Zoom because you're going to get terrible feedback, which is true if you connect the audio. So the way you do this is you get like I'm logged in right now on my laptop. So my laptop is running the room. If I wanted to, I could log in this device as well as a participant. Except when I go in there, if this was a Zoom meeting, it's going to ask, do I want to connect my audio? And you just say no. That's it. So now this has no audio. It's not taking in audio. It's not giving out audio. There's going to be no feedback. But I can use the camera on this. And what's great with it is when you're teaching, especially in dynamic hybrid learning, you're going to sometimes want to get a close-up view of something. So if I teach biology and the kids in class are doing dissections, so they're dissecting an animal, learning about anatomy, and the kids at home, I'm not going to send an animal home for them to dissect, right? You can't do that. But what I can do is bring that secondary device closer to the student that's actually doing the dissection, and the people online can fully participate. They can ask questions. They can say, hey, I think you should cut here to get the kidney out. And then the student in person can go ahead and do that. So they can collaborate. It still makes it pretty interactive. You also can, I'll show you quickly, use the device like to have another spot to teach from. So in here, I'm positioning the iPad in front of that same chart paper. So if I didn't want to use the lazy Susan turntable trick, what I can do is log my iPad in as a participant. I can then point it to the spot in the room where I want to teach, and then just have it on and then not worry about it until I'm ready for it. When I'm ready for it, what I'm going to do as a host, I'm going to have, I've got my gallery view. I can see all the different participants, but one of the participants is Mike's iPad. And so when I click on the participant as a host, there's this little 3-dot thing that shows up in the Zoom meeting. And if you click on that, the option that comes down here is called Spotlight for Everyone. And when you hit that button, whatever's being shown on that camera, this case, it's the camera's not on, so it would just say Mike's iPad really big. But if I had the camera on, it would make whatever that camera was seeing really big for everybody. So this is what it looks like. Right now, you can see I'm standing in front of my computer. You can see my iPad now set up right off to the side there. The camera's on and it's pointing toward the chart paper. I'm going to go ahead and spotlight the video, and I want you to see how the camera changes. And now I have a new spot to teach from. Okay, so now here we go. I'm off my laptop. I'm able to now teach. I don't like this camera angle, so like I'm doing this on the fly with the teachers. So I would fix this camera angle a little bit so there's more of me and less of the ceiling. but you get the idea, right? So this is a way that you can just flip that. Now with this iPad, if it's fully charged, I'm not just limited to a static camera shot. I can move it to different spots in the room. Like I said, Zach, he brings it to the floor for circle time. On my grad student side, this is pre-pandemic, so we don't have masks, but like we have some of our international students don't have access to all the materials. So what we have here, and this might actually get at the secondary or the primary grade issue too, is if there's a specialized tool that the online students don't have access to and it's hard to recreate, they could just be partnered with kids who are in person, who can do some of the work with them. They can still collaborate, but the student online or in person is the hands. They're the ones that will do the manipulating. But what we're doing here is a really interesting task where we're looking at surface area and volume and like what happens as you deconstruct a cube and like what happens to the surface area and volume and the relationship. And so there's some interesting complex math happening here. We're just using cubes to do that. And the people who don't have access to the materials are just watching, but they can say, hey, I think you should take off all the orange ones and this is going to happen. And so they're able to be participating. They just don't touch the materials. So that's one other way you can use the secondary camera. The last one, again, I try to do things on the cheap, is teachers can use their secondary camera along with a something that has holes in it and a frame structure. So we have these are all over the place for us for school. They're just milk crates. So they're pretty sturdy and stuff. You could use a laundry basket. There's a lot of different things you could do. But if you take the milk crate and you put your device on top of it, so the actual lens is fitting through the one of the holes there, and then you have the milk crate on its side. Inside that milk crate, I could actually put some papers, and the camera lens is actually pointing down on the papers. And then what I could do is spotlight that video. And I basically just made a document camera using my my secondary device and a milk crate. And that's what, if you might have seen the milk crate in the video, that's what I was using it for. So that's just a few quick little hacks that I find that work really well to make things a little bit more visible as possible. But I also will recommend to be as low tech as possible. Like for all these fun creative hacks, I really don't use a lot of technology. My preference is I use basically Zoom and Google Apps. That's it. I know there's Flipgrid and Screencastify and all these other things. I don't use it because I find that the more technology I introduce to students and to myself, the more I fill up my working memory with tech and the less I have room for the teaching. So I will always go to the side of teaching over technology every time. If the technology is not going to make the teaching better, then I'm not using that technology. So I simplify things. So when I think that like Zoom has some great capabilities to do things like annotation where you could like write on the screen in real time, that's great, but that's really techie. I actually prefer, and my grad students just show their work. They hold it up and we screenshot it. Like, it's a lot easier to work off of paper and pencil when possible. You don't need to digitize everything in the remote learning space. And so you'll see that lots of people, I'll have them use the manipulatives when they can. So they'll have, different hands-on things. But a lot of times what I want them to do is keep things pretty simple. I don't want to complicate things, because the simpler it is, the easier it is for them to access. So we can try this right now. We're going to do another game. I'm not going to show you the solution this time, I promise. But the line game, this is something that we could do high tech. I have it set up right now, high tech. I'm going to share with you in the link the high tech version of this. But I'm also going to encourage you, if you have paper and a pencil right now, you don't need to do anything else. You don't need a high tech version. So the line game works like this. This shape you see here with the two circles and then the line going through it, you need to draw this shape. But the rule is, once you start drawing, you cannot lift your pencil. You can't cross any lines. No lines can cross each other. And you can't overlap a line. So like if you were to go like, I can't put my finger over it, but if you were, actually I can do this. So if I were to go like down, let me use red here. If I were to go down and then around and then like around again, and then let me see here. If I go down and around this way, and then I want to come back up, I'm tracing again. I can't do that. I can't overlap. I can't cross lines that are already drawn, and I can't take my pencil off. So that's how that works. I'd like you all right now to try this. Now, while you're doing this, I'll put in the chat, in case you don't have paper or pencil, a digital version of this as well. So you can also use it with your students. So here you go. And that'll force copy for you as well. So you'll have a version of this that you can use. And what you'll see here is you're going to be able to replicate this with your own students. So what I would be doing right now is, as an instructor, one thing you could do if kids are online doing this work and they're working off of paper, I like to do something called work mode. And so what I mean by work mode is I ask students to work on paper, and then I tell them to angle their devices downward. So if they're on like an iPad or a laptop or something, any devices, for the most part, have the ability to angle downward. Let me take I'll leave the picture in picture on so people can draw. But like you can angle it downwards so that I'll turn it around so the camera is facing down on the table, so that I can see their paper pencil work and actually watch what they're doing. This is a way that you can simplify things where kids are using a medium that they're very comfortable with. And at the same time, you get eyes on it because you ask the kids to angle their cameras down so you can see that. Some kids have desktops and they can't angle the camera down. So what I ask them to do is to, if possible, if they can hold up their work and write on it, if they have a clipboard, if that's possible, if that seems to be too disruptive, I'll ask them to just work. And then when I'm checking in with them, I'll ask them to hold it up so I can get a view into what they're doing. But I'm curious right now, has anyone figured out the solution to the line game? Oh, that's impressive. That's impressive. Oh, that's good. Now sometimes people will say yes, and then they're like, "Oh shoot, no, I didn't do it." So now normally in a Zoom meeting, what I would be doing right now is giving you an opportunity to share and have different people share their screens and stuff. It's harder to do because we don't have voice. So good. A lot of people have it. If you don't have it and you're dying a little bit and you need to figure it out, I'll go ahead and show you the solution. If you don't want to see it, close your eyes for 1 minute. I'm going to go to full screen. This is the solution if you want. Here we go. Or I should say this is a solution. There may be another one. And so that's it. So let me, in the chat, the question for you all is, what are some benefits of having low-tech options for participation? Think about that and then put in the chat. What do you think the benefits are for your students and for you of having the low-tech options? Good. Yeah, it's inclusive. What else? Yeah, if students don't have access to tech, right? That's the problem, right? We don't want people not to have access to learning because we're expecting them to like have all these accounts and stuff. Paper is way easier. They can use whiteboards, like whatever they might have. This is what you want. It's accessibility is a really important piece. Don't forget also, it's easy. It's easier. It's much more natural. If any of you have tried to like fumble your way through some of the digital versions of like physical things that we normally do, it's not always efficient. So I always encourage people to think about ways to simplify the process. Yeah, work with what you have. Yeah, so I don't know if anyone ever here saw this show from like the 80s or 90s in the United States called MacGyver. I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and the show MacGyver was this guy that he could I can't try to remember if he was a cop or an investigator or something, but he could invent things out. Like he'd get locked in a room and then he'd look around. There was like a toothpick and a safety pin and a can of soda. And then he would create this thing that would open a door from it. So we jokingly call these MacGyver strategies, where we use what we have and we make it work. And what I like about that is I like to keep things at a level that it's simple, it's affordable, it's easy for everybody, and it keeps the learning at the forefront. I don't want to overwhelm families, kids, teachers, schools with things that are not impossible. I recognize that my setup here at the house is not replicable. That like not every teacher can set up a TV studio. you don't do the work I do. Like I live in every single day. I'm with people from around the world doing this stuff. I needed equipment to make this happen. If you're doing remote learning, this is a temporary solution. And so use what you have and don't overwhelm yourself with it. Remember that the most important thing that engages students is you, the teacher, not the technology. Technology doesn't engage students, teachers do. So I'm going to pause again for questions, and then I'm going to actually talk to you about how do you adapt your teaching, your good teaching, to fit in this space and give you a little takeaway that you'll have. Are there any thoughts on, or any questions on things that we've talked about so far?
I currently do not see any questions. The one thing that I do think that everyone wants to ask but don't really know how to is assessment.
Yeah.
What's the best way to do assessment? Because in our country, we are compelled by the government to do a certain amount of formal assessments, which we cannot really do online, but some of us are forced to. So what are your suggestions maybe in terms of that?
All right. So adapting assessments for online. So the first thing is I think when you want to think about any kind of assessment you're trying to make to work online, the problem that people have is that they ask the wrong question first. Everyone starts to ask, how? How do I do this assessment online? How do I do that assessment online? The reason that's the wrong question is that's the biggest question. And so if we go to the top shelf, largest question, that's the most complicated to answer, we're going to hit walls and we're going to feel like, we can't do this. You got to get rid of that question. Don't ask that question. Okay. Let's ask a different question. The first question is why, and not why, like why do we assess? I'm not going there. When you say, let's talk about assessment on a full range. Like there's the full, like standardized testing all the way down to like informal, like having kids turn and talk to each other so you can gauge where their thinking is. So when I think about assessment, let me think of like that turn and talk right now. Start with something informal, then you can think about how to adapt this. So for a turn and talk, that's where you would ask students to quickly tell a neighbor what their thinking is around this idea and to articulate that. It's a great, useful strategy to check in with kids informally to kind of see where kids are, and you can adapt your instruction based on that. Well, why would we want to do that? Like, what's the goal of it? So I can list out my reasons for wanting to use that informal assessment strategy for a quick check-in to gauge the kids. So I list that. The answers to my why question give me my goal, what I'm trying to achieve with this assessment. Then I'm going to ask what. I'm not going to ask why or how yet. The what question is, what do I need to see, hear, and do to make that happen? Okay. So with what I need to see, hear, and do, this is things that I, as the instructor, want to see from students or hear from students or be able to do with students to achieve that turn and talk. Likewise, I might also ask, what is it that students need to see, hear, and do? So let me pull up. Sorry, I'm juggling between two different slideshows here now. So give me 1 second. Okay. So this is what it looks like. I created a little sheet for you all so you could see this. And sorry, the green, it doesn't translate really well it's much darker on my laptop, but for some reason, Zoom makes it look really obnoxious. I'm not a big fan of that obnoxious green color, but here's a form. I'm going to give you a digital version of this. Okay. This is my process of adapting everything. This is both how to adapt assessment, but also how to adapt instruction as well. So you start with your why. So when I'm going into my why of why do I want to do a turn and talk? So I might say I want students to have a chance to discuss an idea with a partner so they all participate. I want to activate their thinking before whole group discussion. I also want to use it as a formative assessment to gauge where students are in their thinking. Those are my goals. Now, what do I need to see, hear, and do to achieve those goals? Well, for me as a teacher, I need to have split kids into groups or pairs. I need to find a way digitally to put them into small groups, either with their cameras or through some kind of document or something. I want to also be able to see and hear their ideas. I need to find a way to do that. And then for students, they need to be able to easily communicate with their partners. So those are what we need to see here and do. Now, if you notice, when we get into that what column, we can actually answer how to that what column a lot easier than how do we do turn and talk. So we need to split students into pairs or small groups. How do we do that? So go ahead in the chat. How do we split kids into pairs or small groups? What are some ideas you have? Yeah, breakout rooms is one. What else though? What if we didn't want to use breakout rooms? What else could we do? Yeah, there's some other groups. So you might have WhatsApp groups. You might have or WhatsApp groups. You might have some people might use Google Docs that you could do. There's a lot of different ways that you can group kids that are either with cameras or on a document. We need to see here student ideas. How can we do that? And so you start to see like the how question is way easier to ask once we tease this out. And so like, here's what I do is for every thought, I like to brainstorm, like what are all the possible things? And so I'll think of like the pros and cons. Now, I'll be honest, I don't write all this stuff out. This is my framework that goes on in my head. I've done this enough that I can very quickly go through this process. And, but like we could do private chat messages in Zoom. You know, everyone gets to message each other really easy. They all have a partner assigned, they private message, but the con, I can't see it. Doesn't get to one of my goals. If I want to see their thinking, that doesn't help. Public chat. I can see all the conversations, but the con is it's chaotic. So that whole, what I need students to be able to communicate easily, I'm not achieving that there. So I know those are not good options. I could do a Google Doc where they can easily message each other and we can see all the conversations. That's less natural for kids. If you want to see what that looks like, here is this is a turn and talk for a math problem that I gave kids. If you click on this link here, here's an example of it. It's a Google Doc where students are paired off in partners. They are color coded. So if you're Josh, you're going to do your writing in purple. Kate's going to write in red. That way I can tell whose work is whose. They're discussing this prompt of which is the best mistake in mathematics. And then I can go through and see their thinking. So there's another way I can do that. If you click on that doc, you can see it. The con though is it's still less natural for kids to talk. So maybe breakout rooms. So it's very natural. Easy way for kids to have conversation with partners, but con is as a teacher, you probably can't visit all the groups, so you're going to miss a lot of the conversation. So you can see where I'm going here. So what if we did breakout rooms with the Google Doc? So the kids go to breakout rooms, they talk with their partners, and then they get like 1 extra minute or so to write down their notes in their turn and talk sheet. So now what we have is we have kids that have a natural conversation, right? So that achieves what I wanted for students. I'm able to split them into groups and pairs, and I can see in here all student ideas. So this is I like to start with turn and talk because it's really easy to sort of, it's really easy to kind of adapt for that environment. But you can do this for everything. Everything I do in Zoom, I go through why, what, how. That's how I adapt it. I've been doing this for so long now. I usually will like sometimes throw down the gauntlet, the challenge, and say, bring it. What instructional strategy do you think is impossible to do in this space? And I'll figure out a way to make it work because I've done this for so long and this structure really does help me. I'm going to go ahead and give you 2 more things in the chat. Here's a forced copy of this worksheet for you so that you can use this with your staff and yourself to adapt instructional moves and assessment. That's one thing for you. The second thing I'm going to put in here is the example sheet that I just shared with you. There you go. Both of those links, they look like they blended together, but go ahead and click on those and you'll have both the links. I'm going to go ahead. I'm looking at, we got just a few minutes left. Let me go to the one other thing with assessment. I'm going to switch my presentation for a second here. Switch out to assessment. And then I'll show you just a couple of other quick things. So you can tell I present a lot more in the United States. So I have a lot of pop culture references to US television shows and things. So if you don't know what these references are, I can just quickly explain. But the other part of assessment is the formative assessment piece is really important. This is where we're like when we're in the class and we observe students working, it's the hardest thing to replicate in Zoom because it's hard to see the kids work at the same time. I look at a formative assessment through 2 lenses. the product side of things. And so the show that I'm referencing there is called CSI. It's Crime Scene Investigators. And it's all about looking at a crime scene and trying to piece together what happened, like looking at murders and things like that. So in assessment, when we get student work, when they turn in an essay, a lab report, their solutions to a math problem, their social studies project, all of that is it's the product of something that's already happened. And a lot of times as a teacher, like there's a lot of information in there, but you're also trying to write the story. You're trying to figure out, so I wonder why they put this thing here, and why did they interpret sodium this, like, why did they think sodium was like the big influencing factor here when it clearly wasn't? And like you start to have to write a narrative based on the facts that you're seeing, the evidence that you're seeing. And so the way we can also get a better sense of our students is to observe the process. So on the other side is a show called House, which is about diagnostic medicine. And it's about them working with patients to troubleshoot really what's going on with this patient. And I think about our work as teachers, we're trying to diagnose where our kids' thinking is, where the challenges are. And we do that best by watching them and talking with them and interacting with them. And if you combine both the product and the process, you get a more holistic view of students. So how do you do that online? I mentioned before about this idea of angling your cameras down. So I call this work mode. This is where I'll tell my students that if they're doing anything on paper, to just bend their camera down, put things in work mode. So it's a lot easier for me to see. So I can actually just observe their work and take notes. I can interact with them and pull them into a breakout room, get some feedback. The other thing is that you can do it with the devices. Like I said, with an iPad or something, you just turn it the other way. And these are ways that we can build in some of those lenses on formative assessment. The other issue that comes up with remote teaching is this idea around academic integrity. Because students are home, it's harder to monitor whether or not they're cheating. And so there's a lot of challenges that are presented with this. But what I've found is that there's a few things that we can do. One is to consider like what your school district, your region, county, country, however it's organized for education. What's the policy toward academic integrity? And has the culture of integrity been promoted in your school? How has it been promoted in your school prior to COVID-19? And the reason I ask that is a lot of times people say academic integrity wasn't a big problem until COVID came. And then when I say, well, let's talk about like what's going on with the policy. How much do your students understand the policy? Is it written from a punitive point of view, or are you writing your policy from an education point of view? Are you educating families and caregivers around why we have academic integrity policies and what we're looking for? And so what I like to do is apply this process of what I call educate, evaluate, and enhance for maintaining academic integrity. So on the education side here, this comes from Edutopia. It's there's Andrew Miller wrote a great piece around, and I don't have the where this came from. This is just his quote, but he said, instead of looking at a deficit-based approach to assessment, expecting that students will cheat, have an asset-based approach. So we want to trust them to do the right thing, engage them in teachable moments about academic honesty. Teachers' expectations really matter. So I think about like traffic violations. So in the United States, speeding, the way we address speeding in cars is everyone has to take a driver's education course. You learn about the rules of the road, all of that. Then there's reminders posted that tell you how fast you can go on any given road. That works for like 80% of the population. People just kind of do what they're supposed to do. There's 20% that still speed. So there's like enhanced measures. There's radars that are set up where they measure your speed and flash it on a sign. You don't get a ticket or anything, but it's those 20% that are speeding, that's a good reminder that, hey, you're really close to getting a ticket. And if that doesn't work, police officers will pull you over and fine you pretty hefty, and a hefty fine for it. And so we find that with education and reminders, most people do the right thing. And it's likely that it's a small percent of your kids that are outright cheating. And for them, then you put other measures in place. But sometimes these blanket approaches are really not helpful, and we're putting too much energy and effort. So start with educating. In terms of elevating, there's this, I don't know if you're familiar with Bloom's taxonomy. Benjamin Bloom's an educational researcher. He created this pyramid of sort of the ways in which we engage, like at the very basic, it's knowledge level. And then we have understanding and then applying. As we move up in this pyramid, it's the cognitive demand's much higher. So to evaluate a text versus respond to a multiple choice question about the text, it takes a lot more cognitive demand from you. And when you elevate your questions, what you're doing is making it harder. So it's easy for students to find quick answers to knowledge questions. It's harder when they have to put their own analysis into something, or when they're creating something new using the information that you shared. So this is a way that you create assessments that have questions that are much higher level. It makes it harder for kids to copy answers. It also makes it easier for you to get a better understanding of how much they're actually synthesizing. And then the last thing to enhance, when we enhance our data, our assessment practices, this is known in the research world as triangulation, having multiple data points to really gauge what the data is telling you about the students. And so a lot of times assessment's a product-based assessment where students produce answers. That's it. And then we just gauge them on that. We score them on that. But you can also design conversation-based assessments where you're able to have a conversation or listen to a student record their voice discussing their thinking. Observation assessments where you observe them working. These are performance-based assessments. And so if you have a student that on a reading test, for instance, scored really high on this multiple choice reading test, but then you observe them reading. If you're doing, it's like elementary, they're doing reading groups or something, you're observing them and you're noticing that they're really struggling on some basic words. And then you have a conversation with them about the text and realize they don't remember anything of it. It might let you know in that case that multiple choice test, they might have been lucky that day. Maybe multiple choice leads them enough and they're pretty good at navigating that. But because we triangulated that data, we've got other data sources, two data sources that are telling us that score on that multiple choice test might be more of an outlier. And so by triangulating our data, we have a better measure of that. Likewise, if the test someone scored really well on, and then you do a conversation or observation-based assessment, and they don't seem to know the content, maybe they cheated on the test, right? But these are ways that we manage assessment, and ultimately, what we're trying to do with this is take an asset-based approach, assume our kids are doing the best that they can do, and then support them as much as we can with these better measures for assessment. So that's it for my time, I'm realizing. So I want to just thank you all. If there's any last minute questions, I'm happy to field those, but I do want to respect your time, and thank you. And I put my links in there. If you just, the chat's going kind of crazy, but like, I'll just drop it in a couple of times. If you did want to see the YouTube channel, I post a lot of tips, new activities, resources, remote learning things. I'm on Twitter. That's also where I share my, my ideas and tasks and things. So I'm a big proponent of kind of putting things out there for free for people. So feel free to hit me up if you have any questions. And it was great chatting with you all today. Thank you all.
Thank you for that. So for the members who want to get their certificates, you have to be a registered member. Ek gaan dit nou in Afrikaans verder sê. I'm going to switch to Afrikaans. Jy moet 'n geregistreerde lid wees aan ons vakverenigings. Het sy dit vir jou weer geraad hang of nou wat jy aanbied by die skool. En dan as jy geregistreerd is, dan teken jy in op die portaal by onderwysers.co.za. So vir die van julle wat nie weet nie, ek sal dit sommer gou net daar in die chats drop. Net 'n sekond. So dan teken jy daarop in. Jy kan ook dan vir admin, ek gaan net daar e-pos daar sit, admin@skole.co.za kontak indien jy enigstens enige uitdagings ervaar. Maar nou gaan ek dit gaan my skerm deel sodat jy kan sien waarheen om te beweeg. So sodra jy ingeteken het, kom ons sê ek gaan sommer gou inteken as myself. Dan gaan jy na opleiding toe. Jy soek vandag se opleiding. Hy sal in hierdie geval is hy hier in die derde posisie. Dan gaan jy na sien toe en dan die bo, myne is nou oranje want ek het reeds bespreek vir hom, maar gaan daar staan bespreek, jy klik op bespreek. Ons gaan dan net seker maak jy was hierso en ons gaan dan tik dat jy het hierdie webinar bygewoon, jy het die volle sessie gekyk. Ons gaan vir jou die YouTube skakel ook stuur so jy dit kan kyk. en dan kan jy 'n sertifikaat kry. Ek hoop dit maak sin, maar dit is 'n voordeel van ons lidmaatskap. Die res van julle wat nie lede is nie, julle kon na hierdie webinar gratis kyk, maar as jy 'n sertifikaat wil hê om dan ook so bewys te lewer dat jy jouself deurlopend professioneel ontwikkel, dan moet jy 'n lid wees. Baie dankie julle, totsiens, en ek hoop julle het net so baie soos ek geleer. Ek gaan julle almal so 3 minute gee om af te klim en dan gaan ek en Mike gesels. Baie dankie julle.